In this episode, we're going to make the exam blueprint feel less like a mysterious checklist and more like a clear map of what you're expected to understand and do. A lot of beginners hear the word blueprint and picture a secret document full of trivia, but it's closer to a description of the skills the exam wants to see, expressed in categories and outcomes. When you can read that map correctly, the exam stops feeling random, because every question starts to look like it came from a small set of predictable intentions. The goal here is not to memorize the blueprint word for word, but to learn how to translate it into a mental model of what the test is truly measuring. By the end, you should be able to look at any objective and say, I know what kind of thinking this is asking for, and I know what a correct answer would sound like. To decode a blueprint, the first move is understanding what it is and what it is not, because many learners waste time preparing for the wrong thing. A blueprint is a promise from the exam makers about the boundaries of the test, meaning it defines which ideas are in scope and which ideas are outside the fence. It is not a full curriculum, and it is not a list of every detail you could possibly be asked, because an exam cannot measure everything. Instead, it identifies domains of knowledge and the kinds of decisions a person in that role must make. For an incident leader, that usually means planning, organizing people, making trade-offs under pressure, tracking work, and steering the organization from confusion toward clarity. When you read the blueprint with that lens, you stop chasing obscure technical facts and start training your ability to reason about incidents like a coordinator who understands security, not like a command line specialist. A second decoding skill is learning the difference between knowledge and judgment, because most incident leadership exams focus heavily on judgment. Knowledge questions ask what something is, like the meaning of a term or the purpose of a control, and those exist because you need a shared language. Judgment questions ask what you should do next, what you should prioritize, or what signal matters most when information is incomplete. In the incident leadership world, the hard part is rarely that nobody knows what a log is, but that people disagree about what the log means, what it implies, and whether it is reliable. The blueprint often hints at this by using verbs that imply decision-making rather than recall, such as assess, prioritize, coordinate, validate, and communicate. When you see verbs like that, you should expect scenario-style questions where the best answer is the one that matches the role's responsibilities and protects the organization's goals. Now let's talk about what the blueprint is really testing at a deeper level, which is whether you can think in phases and keep your footing as the phase changes. Incident work typically moves through preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and learning, but the real world doesn't always follow a clean order. The blueprint is often organized in a way that mirrors those phases, because each phase requires different instincts. Preparation is about reducing chaos before it happens. Identification is about turning rumors into facts. Containment is about stopping harm without making things worse. And recovery is about restoring trust in operations. Learning is about turning a painful moment into lasting improvement, so the same failure pattern does not repeat. A good blueprint reader notices which phase an objective belongs to, because that tells you what kind of question will appear and what kinds of answers will be considered correct for that moment. An important misconception for beginners is believing the test is primarily about doing technical forensics, because that sounds like what security incidents are in movies. Incident leadership is more about orchestration than deep technical analysis, even though you need enough technical understanding to ask smart questions. The blueprint tends to emphasize coordination, documentation, escalation paths, and decision frameworks, because those are what separate a noisy scramble from a controlled response. That means the exam is likely to reward answers that show discipline, like establishing ownership, setting timelines, managing evidence, and ensuring communications are consistent. If you pick an answer that sounds exciting but ignores process, it will often be wrong. If you pick an answer that sounds calm, structured, and aligned with organizational priorities, it will often be right. This is a crucial shift for new learners, because it changes how you study and how you interpret what a question is truly asking. Another way to decode the blueprint is to treat each objective like a question the exam writers want you to be able to answer aloud in plain language. If an objective is about incident classification, you should be able to explain why classification matters, how classification changes priorities, and what mistakes happen when classification is wrong. If an objective is about tracking and timelines, you should be able to explain what makes a timeline reliable, what belongs in it, and how it supports decisions and evidence. The exam is not reading your mind, so it looks for signs that you can connect an idea to outcomes. In other words, it tests whether your knowledge has hooks attached to real incident work. When you study an objective, don't stop at definitions, because a definition without consequences is usually not enough to earn points on a decision-focused exam. Blueprints also carry hidden hints about the difficulty level, and learning to spot those hints keeps you from overstudying the wrong depth. If an objective mentions broad concepts like policies, playbooks, escalation, and governance, that suggests the exam cares about understanding systems and roles, not low-level implementation details. If an objective points to things like evidence handling, logging, and backups, that suggests you need conceptual accuracy about how those supports response, not how to configure a specific product. If the blueprint mentions communication, leadership, or coordination, that is a signal that the test will include messy human dynamics, like conflicting priorities or incomplete data. A beginner can prepare for that by practicing calm reasoning. What is the immediate goal? What must be preserved? Who needs to know? And what decision reduces risk without creating new risk? That kind of thinking lines up with blueprint intent far more than memorizing rare vocabulary. A practical decoding technique is to group objectives by the kind of mental move they require, because that predicts the patterns of questions you will see. Some objectives require classification, which is about sorting a situation into a meaningful category so the team can choose the right playbook. Some require prioritization, which is about deciding what matters first when time is limited and the cost of delay is real. Some require coordination, which is about choosing who owns what, when escalation triggers, and how handoffs avoid gaps. Some require verification, which is about checking assumptions and validating evidence before making irreversible moves. When you see a question, you can often identify which mental move is being tested, and that helps you eliminate tempting wrong answers. Wrong answers often belong to a different mental move, like jumping to eradication when the question is still in identification, or making a communications decision when the real need is evidence integrity. It also helps to recognize that incident leadership tests often measure your ability to reduce ambiguity, because ambiguity is the natural enemy of response. The blueprint may not use the word ambiguity, but it will refer to things like establishing situational awareness, maintaining accurate status, and building timelines. Those are all ways to turn scattered observations into shared reality. In practice, that means you should expect questions where multiple options seem reasonable, but one option most directly creates clarity for the team. For example, if information is conflicting, the best next step might be to identify a single source of truth and validate it, rather than announcing conclusions too early. If tasks are slipping, the best move might be tightening ownership and deadlines, rather than adding more people. The blueprint is testing whether you can take a foggy situation and create structure without panic. A common blueprint reading mistake is treating every domain as separate, like you will study one box at a time and then move on. In real incidents, domains overlap constantly, and the exam often rewards answers that show you understand those connections. Policies and playbooks connect to authority, because you cannot lead if nobody knows who can approve containment actions. Logging connects to timelines, because a timeline built on unreliable logs becomes a story rather than evidence. Communication connects to tracking, because you cannot communicate accurately if your status is outdated or optimistic. Training connects to readiness, because a team that has never practiced will make avoidable mistakes in pressure moments. When decoding the blueprint, try to hear the connective tissue between objectives, because those connections are where leadership decisions live. Another important layer is recognizing what the exam is not trying to test, because that helps you avoid distraction. If the blueprint is about leadership and incident management, the exam is unlikely to require memorizing product-specific commands, obscure protocol fields, or detailed exploit mechanics. You still need to understand enough about common attack types to classify incidents and set goals, but you are not expected to be the deepest technical specialist in the room. The exam is more likely to ask what questions you would ask, what evidence you would preserve, and how you would sequence actions to reduce harm. It may also test whether you know when to bring in specialized help, which is itself a leadership skill. Beginners sometimes think asking for help is weakness, but in incident leadership, it is often the correct move, as long as it is done through a clear escalation path. When you look at a blueprint, it can help to translate it into a set of promises you make to yourself as a future incident leader. You promise to prepare before chaos, so the first hour of an incident is not spent inventing roles and approvals. You promise to protect evidence and maintain accurate records, so decisions and accountability are grounded in fact. You promise to balance containment and recovery, so you do not solve one problem by creating a bigger business problem. You promise to communicate with discipline, so stakeholders get consistent updates rather than rumors. You promise to learn and improve, so each incident increases capability instead of draining confidence. This matters because the exam is not only measuring what you know, but whether your instincts align with responsible leadership. If an answer option violates one of those promises, it is often a trap. Finally, decoding what the blueprint really tests means accepting that the exam is measuring consistency under pressure, not perfection. Many questions are designed so that more than one option sounds useful, because in real life you often have multiple good moves available. The exam usually asks for the best next step, the most appropriate action, or the highest priority, and that requires ranking actions by intent and timing. A blueprint helps you learn that ranking because it shows which themes the exam values, such as preparation, coordination, accurate tracking, and thoughtful trade-offs. When you study with the blueprint in mind, you stop thinking of the exam as a puzzle and start thinking of it as a role play of responsible incident leadership decision-making. That is the point of the blueprint, and it is also the path to passing. To wrap this up, the blueprint is your lens for understanding the exam's purpose, not a spreadsheet you memorize. It tells you the kinds of thinking that will be rewarded, and for incident leadership, that thinking centers on clarity, coordination, prioritization, and disciplined follow-through. If you learn to spot the phase of response, the mental move being tested, and the role responsibility behind each objective, questions become much easier to interpret. You also reduce anxiety, because the exam stops feeling like it could ask anything and starts feeling like it will ask predictable things in predictable ways. As you move forward, keep returning to the blueprint as a map, not to chase trivia, but to practice the decisions an incident leader must make when the organization needs calm direction and reliable judgment.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.